Winter is a curious thing, isn't it? A season dressed in white, soft as silence, yet sharp enough to cut through bone. The world lies frozen beneath a sheet of cold glass. The days grow shorter than a dying candle, and the nights stretch out like long corridors where whispers travel far and shadows learn to move. We call it the season of joy, the season of gifts, laughter, and warm fires. Yet beneath that warmth, beneath the glow of candles and the chime of bells, something darker stirs, something ancient, something far older than Christmas itself. For when the air grows cold enough, when your breath becomes a ghost and the world falls silent, another figure wakes. Not jolly, not kind, not round and red and merry. No, this creature crawls from the oldest corners of winter folklore. Horned, clawed, wrapped in chains. Eyes burning like embers taken straight from a dying hearth. And his name is Krampus. Before we descend deeper into this chilling tale, before we open the frostbitten doors of the past, I want to pause for a moment. If you enjoy dark folklore, ancient legends, and the eerie truths buried beneath holiday traditions, make sure to subscribe, because more stories of winter's shadow are coming. And tell me in the comments, which part of the world are you listening from? Your country, your cold nights, your winter traditions, they all shape how stories like this survive. Now, let us begin. You may think Christmas has always belonged to Santa Claus. Red suit, flying sleigh, cheerful smile, reindeer prancing across rooftops. But that version of Christmas is new, modern, barely a breath old in the long, ancient lungs of winter tradition. Before Santa, before Coca-Cola made him plump and red, before jingling bells and neatly wrapped gifts, winter was not a season of kindness. It was a season of fear. Imagine living in the old Alpine villages centuries ago, long before electricity, long before central heating, long before cities gleamed with lights. Winter was a force, not a season, an enemy that pressed against wooden walls, whispered through cracks, stole food, ended harvests, and punished the weak. When the sun sank early, it left behind miles of darkness. Wolves prowled, the forests groaned under the weight of snow, and people waited inside with nothing but candlelight and hope. In nights like these, you didn't know what moved beyond your door. A human, an animal, or something else. This is the world that shaped Krampus. The creature didn't come from a book, nor from the imagination of any single storyteller. He was forged from centuries of fear, fear of winter, fear of punishment, fear of what waited in the cold darkness. While modern Christmas offers sweetness, the old Christmas offered survival. Parents didn't tell children stories of gifts. They told stories of consequences. They spoke of a beast, a towering figure, half goat and half demon, with horns spiraling from his head like twisted roots. His fur matted and blackened, clinging to his body like a cloak stolen from the night itself. His face, oh, his face, elongated, bestial, the mouth stretched into a permanent snarl of yellow teeth, a tongue long as a serpent's, lashing like a whip, and eyes, two burning coals glowing from a skull that seemed carved from ancient stone. He did not walk, he clattered. Chains wrapped around him rattled with every step. Heavy iron shackles dragged behind him like echoes of sins long forgotten. Some say the chains were placed on him by the church, an attempt to bind an ancient pagan spirit. Others say the chains were his own, tokens of the souls he had taken. Whatever the truth, his arrival meant one thing: judgment. But Krampus was not just a punisher. He was the shadow to someone else's light, the darkness to St. Nicholas's holy glow. Before Santa Claus became the merry icon of Christmas, St. Nicholas was known throughout Europe as a bringer of gifts, a protector of children. And as the centuries passed, people began to pair him with something older than the Christian faith itself, a winter demon, a creature that embodied everything St. Nicholas was not. Together, they created a balance. On one night, December 5th, a night now known as Krampusnacht, the demon would walk. He would roam through villages, scraping his claws across doorways, peering into windows with a grin that froze the soul. Children trembled under blankets. Parents whispered warnings. Bells jingled, not to call him, but to ward him away. And yet, he always found his way. Krampus carried with him symbols, each one darker than the last. In one hand, he held birch rods, bundles of sticks bound together, ready to whip the disobedient. The sound they made when striking the floor was enough to send shivers through even the bravest hearts. In the other hand, he held a rusted chain, wrapped like a snake around his body. He dragged it across the snow, carving deep scars into the frozen earth. And on his back, a basket, not for gifts, not for toys, not for sweets. This basket was for carrying away the wicked, children deemed too far gone for forgiveness. Stories claimed he would shove them inside, slam the lid shut, and vanish into the night. Where did he take them? Some said into the forest, to abandon them in the cold. Some said into the mountains, where caves swallowed them whole. Others whispered he dragged them to hell itself, an icy hell, a winter hell, a place where no fire burned, where screams froze before leaving the throat. These tales were not just told for entertainment, they were warnings. You see, winter was deadly. If a child disobeyed, if they strayed outside, if they wandered into the forest or wasted supplies, families could starve. Entire villages could perish. So parents created a monster to protect their children through fear. And fear is a powerful teacher. But Krampus was not evil, not in the way demons are typically portrayed. He was necessary. He was balance. He was the dark reminder that good behavior has meaning, that actions have consequences, that winter itself was a test you had to survive. Children learned this well. When the snow began to fall, their hearts tightened. They swept floors, helped with chores, spoke politely, followed rules. Not because they loved goodness, but because Krampus was listening. Outside, in the cold, in the fog, in the dead of night, watching, waiting. For winter always calls its own, and every year, without fail. When the moonlight scattered across fresh snow and chimney smoke curled into the sky like ancient spirits, parents whispered the same warning: be good, or Krampus will come. But the tale does not end with fear. It never does. Krampus evolved, shaped by centuries, by cultures, by religion, by survival. How he became bound to St. Nicholas, how he went from pagan deity to demonic companion, how his legend survived attempts to ban him, silence him, erase him. That is a tale older than Christmas itself, a tale of fire and frost, a tale of gods and demons, a tale of winter's two faces, light and darkness. To understand Krampus fully, you must travel back, farther back, before Santa, before Christianity, before Christmas was Christmas, into a world where winter spirits ruled, and the horned god walked, long before Christmas lights glowed across rooftops, long before carols drifted through warm houses, and long before the name Krampus was whispered in winter's shadow. The world was ruled by older gods. Gods with antlers instead of halos. Gods who walked the forests instead of cathedrals. Gods who demanded respect rather than worship. If we wish to understand Krampus, truly understand him, we must shed the modern skin of Christmas and descend into a far more ancient world. A world carved not by tinsel and joy, but by fire, frost, and fear. A world where winter was alive, and every breath you drew was a negotiation with nature itself. Imagine standing centuries ago in the heart of the European Alps. There are no towns, no railroads, no holiday markets, no electric lights. Only forests, endless, towering. Ancestral forests where the wind howls like a starving spirit. The winters are so severe they swallow entire months, burying villages in snow taller than a man. Wolves stalk the edges of settlements. Avalanches roar like thunder. Hunger, disease, and darkness rule half the year. And in such a world, people didn't need stories of reindeer or elves. They needed explanations. They needed spirits who controlled the cold. They needed guardians and monsters. Krampus was one of them. Or rather, he descended from something older than himself. Pagan cultures across Europe worshipped a horned figure tied to winter, forests, and survival. A being that symbolized both life and death, generosity and cruelty, fertility and famine. Today, scholars call him the Horned God. But to ancient tribes, he had no single name. He was simply the presence. The shadow in the trees, the heartbeat of the forest, the cold breath on the back of your neck when you walked alone at dusk. And Krampus is his echo. In these early tribes, winter was not just a season. It was a power, a force that demanded offerings, rituals, and discipline. People believed winter spirits watch their behavior, judge their actions, and punish disrespect. Children who misbehaved threatened not just themselves, but their entire village. A single mistake in winter could mean death for everyone. So these early cultures created winter guardians, spirits who enforced rules, protected the home, and frightened the undisciplined into obedience. Krampus was not yet the horned demon we know now. He was a watcher, a winter enforcer, a spirit of consequence. Many ancient winter festivals included figures that resembled the early form of Krampus. Horned masks carved from wood, animal skins draped over shoulders, men roaring through villages during winter rites, driving away evil or punishing laziness. These rituals were not entertainment, they were survival. When the first snows fell, communities needed discipline. Everyone had tasks. Everyone had duties. And so, the tribe created a figure to remind them. A figure part man, part beast. A figure who saw everything. This is the oldest root of Krampus. But as centuries passed and tribes grew into villages, a new force rose across Europe: Christianity. With it came new beliefs, new rituals, new holy figures. And for the church, the ancient pagan gods posed a problem. They were too wild, too powerful, too beloved to simply erase. So instead of attempting to destroy these spirits entirely, Christianity transformed them. They reinterpreted them. They reshaped them. And in this reshaping, this collision of old and new, Krampus, as we know him, was born. Christian leaders saw the people still feared these horned winter spirits. They still performed rituals to appease them. They still believed misbehavior would summon these creatures. So, the church did what it often did. It took the old symbols and gave them new meanings. The horned god, once a symbol of nature and winter, was recast as a demon. His horns became marks of evil. His wildness became sin. His chains became the bindings of hell. But the people did not entirely abandon their traditions. Instead, the ancient spirit merged into Christian winter celebrations. And then came a holy figure who would forever change Krampus's fate, Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas was known for generosity, kindness, and charity. He was the protector of children, the giver of gifts. And in the old Alpine villages, the people paired him with his opposite, his shadow, his reminder. What better balance for a saint than a beast? It was perfect. Saint Nicholas rewarded good children. Krampus punished the wicked. Light and dark, mercy and consequence. Two halves of a single winter truth. But let us return for a moment, deeper still, into the pagan world from which Krampus truly crawled. In these early cultures, horned figures symbolized the balance between humanity and nature. They represented instincts, wildness, survival. Winter spirits often wore goat skins and horns because goats were sacred symbols, creatures that could survive harsh climates, climb impossible cliffs, and endure where others perished. The horns were not just decoration. They meant strength, determination, endurance. Krampus inherited these traits. The long tongue, that came from older depictions of wild spirits licking the world to taste its sins. The chains? They were originally not symbols of captivity, but tools used in rituals to drive away evil. Only later did the church reinterpret them as demonic chains. The birch rods, those dreaded switches Krampus still carries, were originally sacred branches used in cleansing rituals, believed to drive away darkness and illness. Even the basket on his back had ancient meaning. It was not meant for abducting children. It symbolized carrying burdens, collecting the bad spirits of the village and removing them. But time changes everything. By the time Christianity spread through the Alpine regions, these meanings were twisted into something more terrifying and much more effective for controlling children. The winter spirit, who once cleansed the village, now punished the disobedient. The ancient goat god became the demon under your bed. The basket became a prison. The rods became whips, and the chains became a warning. Misbehave, and you will be taken. Yet even as Christianity reshaped him, Krampus remained stubbornly pagan. His horns, his fur, his animalistic growls, these were traits no amount of religious reinterpretation could erase. When villagers dressed as Krampus for winter rituals, they weren't just celebrating a demon, they were reviving an ancient memory. A memory of a time when winter spirits ruled the land. A memory of a world where nature demanded both fear and reverence. Every element of Krampus comes from these old beliefs. His appearance is a collage of ancient symbols. His purpose, a winter judge, comes from ancient necessity. His presence during the darkest nights reflects the old fear of winter's power. Even Krampusnacht, December 5th, falls during the traditional time when ancient tribes believed winter spirits roamed freely. Nothing about him is random. He is a surviving fossil of a forgotten world. And that is what makes him so powerful. When you hear chains dragging across frozen ground, when you imagine horns silhouetted against moonlit snow, when you feel a chill crawl up your spine during winter nights, that feeling is older than Santa, older than Christmas, older than Christianity itself. It is the echo of ancient rituals whispering through time. It is the voice of ancestral fear speaking through generations. It is the world reminding us that winter once ruled humanity, not the other way around. Krampus survived because he was needed, first as a guardian spirit, then as a punisher, then as a demonized reminder of consequences. But through all these transformations, he never vanished. He never faded. He adapted. He changed shape. He changed meaning. Yet the core remained. Krampus is the embodiment of winter's darkness. He is the shadow cast by the fires we light to survive. The living reminder that nature is older, stronger, and colder than we ever want to believe. And as we move forward into his history, we will see how the arrival of Saint Nicholas created one of the strangest partnerships in folklore, the holy man and the demon walking side by side, light and shadow, reward and punishment. A balance so ancient that even modern Christmas has not been able to erase it. Winter in the old Alpine valleys was never merely a season. It was a force that tested the backbone of every village that clung to the mountainside. The people fought the cold with fire, prayer, and community, but deep inside, they knew it was not the frost alone they feared. It was the things that moved with the frost, the things ancient, the things older than scripture or sanctuary. And so, as Christianity began its slow, deliberate spread into these rugged lands, it did not find empty ground. It found shadows with names. It found spirits with shape. And among those shapes, towering above all others, was the one they called Krampus. But the church did not come with armies or swords. It came with a saint, a bishop wrapped in robes of red and white, bearing not fear, but mercy. The man who would become known as Saint G, or Nicholas, protector of children, patron of the helpless, the symbol of hope when the world grew bitter and cold. His arrival did not erase the darkness that lived in the valleys. Instead, it changed the relationship between light and shadow forever. For the villagers spoke of Krampus not as a rumor, but as a certainty. They believed he was the living echo of the Horned One, a creature shaped by the wild, untamed mountains, a reminder that winter demands respect. And as the bishop walked into these lands, offering solace, baptizing infants, blessing the poor, and teaching love, the people welcomed him, but also warned him. "Here," they whispered, "the snow is not silent. There are chains in the night." Saint Nicholas listened, and as he listened, the legend began to twist. It did not disappear, for stories do not die simply because a new one has arrived. Instead, something unexpected happened. The two stories, one holy, one hellish, began to merge. In the earliest depictions, Nicholas was a lone shepherd of souls. But in the Alpine regions, the saint did not walk alone. At his side, lurking in his shadow like a nightmare tethered to a dream, stood Krampus. No longer merely the spirit of winter's wrath, he became something new, the dark companion of a holy man. It sounds impossible, even contradictory, a demon walking beside a saint. But the people saw purpose in it. Where Nicholas brought gifts, Krampus brought consequences. Where Nicholas rewarded virtue, Krampus punished vice. Together, they created a balance as old as humanity itself, the promise of reward and the threat of punishment. For the church, this was a problem. A demon could not be legitimized, not in doctrine, not in public ritual, and yet the villagers refused to let him go. So, rather than erase the creature, the church did something subtler. It reshaped him. Krampus would not be a free, wild demon, they declared. He would be bound, chained, controlled, a captured beast walking under a bishop's authority. This is why, in the old illustrations, Krampus always appears with chains wrapped around his arms, legs, and horns. The chains symbolized that the church had tamed him. They claimed he was no longer a threat, but a tool, a fearsome servant used to scare children into good behavior. The villagers accepted this story, not because they believed the saint had truly subdued the ancient beast, but because it allowed their old traditions to survive under new systems of belief. And so, the ritual began to evolve. On the cold nights of early December, villagers would prepare for the arrival of two figures, one who walked with grace, one who stalked with hunger. Nicholas came for the hopeful. Krampus came for the guilty. Imagine the scene. A quiet village buried under 6 feet of snow, where every window flickered with candlelight. Families gathered close, children clutching blankets. Outside, in the misty dark, the sound of church bells echoed, followed by the heavier, colder sound of rattling iron. The children knew which sound belonged to which visitor. Nicholas's bell rang like comfort. Krampus's chains clanged like a warning. When Nicholas entered a home, he brought warmth. He praised the obedient, blessed the humble, rewarded the kind. But Krampus, he came only for the wicked, for the liars, the bullies, the lazy, the disrespectful. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was enough. The towering silhouette, the curved horn scraping the wooden door frame, the glowing eyes studying each trembling child. In some legends, Nicholas stepped between Krampus and the fearful children, raising a gentle hand to calm him. In others, he simply nodded, acknowledging that fear too is a teacher. And Krampus obeyed, because in the folklore of these lands, darkness may stalk, but it must always bow to the light. Yet the villagers knew the truth. Balance is not obedience. It is coexistence. Krampus was not truly tamed. He was never meant to be. He was allowed to exist because he served a purpose the saint could not. Humans respond to hope, yes, but they also respond to fear. Hope makes them dream. Fear keeps them disciplined. Together, they form the moral spine of old village life. As Christianity strengthened its roots, the partnership between Nicholas and Krampus solidified into tradition. The clergy preached of good deeds and divine love. The townsfolk whispered of birch rods and midnight footsteps. Children woke on December mornings, either to gifts of fruit and nuts, or to marks on the doorframe where something clawed at the wood. One saint, one demon, united not by friendship, but by necessity. The tale of their companionship became a seasonal ritual, an eternal lesson carved into winter itself, that even in the most sacred time of year, shadows do not vanish. They simply walk beside the light, waiting for their moment. And so, the legend spread, generation by generation, growing deeper, darker, more complex. Parents told their children, if you are good, the saint will see you, but if you are wicked, the beast will come. This dynamic shaped the culture of winter in the Alpine world. Children learned early that December was not just a month of celebration, it was a month of judgment. And as the centuries passed, Krampus became the embodiment of every fear that lurked in the long, freezing nights. Saint Nicholas offered salvation. Krampus offered consequence. And together, they shaped a season that was never just merry. It was meaningful. The night of December 5th is not an ordinary night. It is not meant for comfort, merrymaking, or peaceful sleep. In the Alpine world, across Austria, Bavaria, and the ancient mountains that cut through Central Europe, this night belongs to him. long before the church bells ring for St. Nicholas Day, the world dips into a strange and sacred darkness. The air grows colder than the nights before, as if the winter itself holds its breath. And people, no matter how modern or rational they claim to be, feel an ancient instinct stirring inside them. An instinct that warns, stay close to the fire, stay inside. Something walks in the snow. This is Krampusnacht, the night of Krampus. It begins quietly, with only the subtle shift of the world hinting at what approaches. Snow gathers in thicker blankets on rooftops. The wind sharpens its edge. Dogs grow restless. Children glance nervously at the windows. And in the far distance, where the mountains swallow the moonlight, something begins to move. At first, it is only a sound, distant, metallic, and irregular. Not the steady toll of a church bell, but something heavier, harsher, as though iron were being dragged across the frozen earth. The villagers recognize this sound instantly. They have heard it since childhood in stories whispered at bedtime. The chains, the cursed chains, the sign that Krampus is near. Slowly, as the sound draws closer, the village transforms. Shadows lengthen unnaturally. Lanterns flicker without wind. Even the snow seems to darken beneath the weight of an old, unspoken dread. Houses lock their doors, not to keep the cold out, but to keep him out. Parents gather their children around the hearth and murmur the same warning spoken across centuries. Be good now, he's walking. Then, somewhere in the street, the first bell rings. Not the gentle, hopeful bell of St. Nicholas, but a low, guttural chime. A bell forged for no holy purpose, a bell meant to unsettle the soul. It echoes between the stone walls, bouncing from window to window, shaking the nerves of anyone still awake. And suddenly, the quiet village is alive with expectation and fear, because this bell is never alone. Behind it comes the roar. The Krampuslauf, the Krampus run, bursts into the streets like a storm of fur, horns, and fire. Men wearing ancient masks, carved from dark wood and passed down through families for generations, take on the monstrous form of Krampus. Their costumes, covered in coarse fur, transform them into silhouettes that resemble the creature of legend. They wield torches that spit sparks into the night, and chains that drag with chilling weight across the cobblestones. They stomp, snarl, growl, and march in chaotic procession, making the darkness feel alive. To an outsider, it might seem like a performance, a cultural spectacle, or a festival meant for entertainment. But to those who belong to the old Alpine bloodlines, Krampusnacht is not a show. It is a ritual, a remembrance, a reenactment of a truth they once feared literally. Krampus will come for the wicked. The procession moves through the village like a living nightmare. Krampus figures leap toward windows, rattling their chains. They chase the bravest youths who dare to watch from doorways. They stamp their hooves into the snow, leaving deep, claw-like impressions behind. And through all this fear, there is a deeper purpose: to remind every child, every adult, every soul that good behavior is not simply encouraged. It is required, especially during this sacred season. But the ritual is more than fear. There is beauty in this chaos, an ancient, unearthed beauty. The firelight dancing against the winter sky, the crisp air filled with the sound of bells and roars, the collective heartbeat of an entire community embracing a tradition older than their religion, older than their borders, older than their written history. A moment where darkness is not denied, but acknowledged, respected, and contained within ceremony. Because only by confronting darkness can light have meaning. As the procession continues, a strange balance emerges. The villagers know that on this night, Krampus roams freely, not as a demon to be fought, but as a reminder of the moral order that winter demands. Tonight he punishes. Tonight he judges. Tonight he roars so loudly that even the mountains listen. By midnight, the noise begins to fade. The footsteps grow lighter, the chains quieter. One by one, the torches burn out, replaced by the soft glow of lanterns returning to windows. And as suddenly as he arrived, Krampus retreats into the dark from which he came. Not defeated, not dismissed, simply finished. The villagers breathe again. Children emerge from blankets. Doors unlock. The snow begins to fall softly once more. And somewhere beyond sight, the faintest echo of retreating chains assures them that the ritual is complete. Krampusnacht has passed. Tomorrow, the saint will come with gifts and blessings, as he always does. But tonight was a reminder of how thin the line is between mercy and judgment, between holy light and primal shadow, between the joy of Christmas and the chilling myths that share its season. Every creature of legend carries symbols, objects that are more than tools, more than weapons. They are extensions of its purpose, reflections of its nature. And Krampus, the ancient punisher of winter nights, carries with him a set of instruments so iconic, so deeply carved into Alpine memory, that no tale of him is complete without them. To understand Krampus, you must understand what he holds. The first and most terrifying is the chain. Cold, heavy, and unmistakable, it drags behind him with a scraping rhythm that freezes the spine of anyone who hears it. The church once claimed these chains represented bondage, proof that the saint had subdued him. But the villagers knew better. Krampus allowed the chains to rattle. He wore them not as restraints, but as warnings. Each link echoes through the December night, an iron heartbeat announcing judgment. When Krampus moves, the chains scrape across stone and snow like claws etching into the world itself. Some legends say the chains are forged from the sins of the wicked, each link representing a broken promise, a stolen moment, a cruel word spoken in malice. Whether truth or superstition, the sound of those chains has haunted children for centuries. Then there is the birch rod, a bundle of thin, flexible branches bound tightly together. The birch is not chosen at random. It is an ancient tree of winter, a tree believed by pagans to purify, to drive out darkness and mischief. But in Krampus's hands, the birch becomes something else entirely, a tool of discipline. He lashes it against the ground, against door frames, against the ankles of those who flee from him in the streets. It whistles through the air with cruel speed, delivering sharp, stinging reminders of a child's wrongdoings. Parents once placed birch rods near their doors to warn their children, "Behave, or he will come for you." But the most feared object of them all is the basket, a large woven carrier strapped to Krampus's back, its opening wide enough to swallow a child whole. In some tales, he fills it with the naughtiest children and vanishes into the mountains, their screams muffled by the winter wind. In others, he carries them to rivers, forests, or even the underworld. The destination changes from village to village, but one thing remains constant. The basket is the point of no return. The sight of it in old paintings, looming behind him like a dark, hollow maw, struck terror deeper than any threat of a beating. Because the basket was not punishment, it was disappearance. Together, these tools form the trinity of Krampus's terror. The chains that warn, the birch that disciplines, the basket that condemns. They are not symbols of cruelty, but of consequence. The ancient Alpine world believed every action deserved a response, and during the harshest month of winter, that response took the shape of a horned figure with glowing eyes, rattling chains, and a basket large enough to carry away the wicked. On Krampusnacht, these tools reminded everyone, child and adult alike, that darkness walks with purpose. The chains, the birch rod, the basket, these are not random instruments of terror. They exist because Krampus is not chaos without purpose. He is judgment embodied. And after the rattling chains announce his presence, after the birch rods tremble in his grip, there comes a moment that is far more terrifying than any strike or snarl. The moment he decides. Because Krampus does not lash blindly into the night. No, he watches, he studies, he remembers. The villagers once believed that Krampus carried a ledger, an invisible list etched not on parchment but into his very being. A list of deeds, small lies whispered in dim corners, chores neglected, promises broken, tantrums thrown, cruelty hidden behind childish innocence. Nothing escaped him. Nothing was too small. For Krampus was not merely the punisher of the wicked. He was the observer of all moral cracks that formed during the year. And so, when he enters a village on Krampusnacht, he does not rush. He does not strike the first child he sees. Instead, he pauses in every home he visits, looming silently in the doorway, horns brushing the wooden frame, breath steaming into the cold air. His glowing eyes sweep across the room like lanterns searching for guilt. The chains grow still. Even the wind falls quiet as he listens. Not to words, but to hearts. Children feel it immediately. The weight, the scrutiny, the sense that their secrets are now exposed before something ancient and merciless. Some hide behind their mothers. Some sink to the floor in tears. Some attempt to speak, to confess, to plead. But Krampus does not respond to apologies. He responds only to truth. And in this moment of heavy silence, every child knows exactly what he sees in them. A year's worth of behavior rises like ghosts around them. Those who have shown kindness, even in small gestures, feel the tension loosen. The birch rod lowers. The basket seems to shrink away. The presence of Krampus becomes a warning, not a sentence. But the others, the ones who taunted, who stole, who mocked the weak, who ignored their parents, who grew proud and careless as the year wore on. They feel the heat of judgment settle on their skin like frostbite. Krampus steps closer. His chains drag with that dreadful metallic scrape, each sound echoing their misdeeds. Yet even then, there is a strange order to his punishment. For the mildly disobedient, he delivers a sharp reminder, a sting from the birch across the legs or wrist, enough to burn but not to scar. A lesson. For the stubborn troublemakers, he drags his claws across the floor near them or thumps his hooves, reminding them that fear has a purpose, a warning. But the truly wicked, the ones whose cruelty has taken root, these are the ones he lifts into his basket. No one knows exactly what becomes of the children carried away. Some legends say they are thrown into icy rivers, their sins washed away by bitter water. Others whisper he takes them to caves deep within the Alps, where echoes replace screams. And in the darkest stories, Krampus devours them, one by one, as the mountains swallow the sound. But the villagers of old understood something important. Judgment was never random. Krampus did not choose victims. He answered them. By dawn, when the saint arrives with gifts and blessings, the village is quieter, softer, cleansed by consequence. Because the night before, Krampus held court, and every child, every family knew that winter had a judge who never made mistakes. Judgment, once passed, is never the end. It is only the beginning. And on Krampusnacht, when the creature's glowing eyes have chosen their guilty, when the chains fall silent and the hearth's flame trembles in fear, the night descends into its most chilling chapter. Because Krampus does not merely identify the wicked, he corrects them. The punishments he delivers are as old as the mountains themselves, shaped by centuries of fear, discipline, and the ancient belief that winter allows no softness. The Alpine people understood that survival required obedience, respect, and humility. And Krampus, terrifying, relentless Krampus, was winter's enforcer. As soon as he decides a child is deserving of punishment, he acts. Not with frenzy, not with cruelty, but with an eerie sense of ritual. The first tool he uses is often the simplest: fear, a low growl that vibrates through the floorboards, a chain dropped heavily onto the ground, a clawed hand dragging slow, deliberate lines across the doorframe. These are not attacks. They are warnings, delivered with an intelligence that chills the blood. Krampus wants the child to feel every ounce of guilt that has brought him there. He wants the lesson to sink deep enough to last a lifetime. For the children who have strayed only slightly, this fear is punishment enough. They collapse into trembling obedience, promising through sobs that they will change. And Krampus, sensing the sincerity of their terror, backs away. Fear has done its work. But for those whose misbehavior has taken root, the birch rods come next. He swings them not with blind rage, but with the precision of a judge delivering a sentence. Sharp cracks echo through the house as the branches strike legs or backsides, burning the skin with cold fire. In those moments, the child does not think of rebellion or defiance. They think only of repentance. Many adults later admitted a strange truth. They feared the birch rod more than any sermon, more than any punishment a parent could give, because the birch carried the authority of both nature and nightmare. Then there are the ones who have gone beyond mischief, those who have lied repeatedly, bullied without remorse, stolen without guilt, hurt without regret. For them, the night darkens further. Krampus does not stay indoors with such children. He drags them outside, out into the snow, out into the sharp, merciless cold where the mountains loom like silent witnesses. Some he forces to run through the icy streets, chains snapping at their heels, a reminder that the world is much larger and much harsher than their small, selfish defiance. Others he rolls into the snow, pressing them into the freezing white until fear and frost mingle into unforgettable discipline. But the worst fate is reserved for the truly wicked. These are the children Krampus lifts and shoves into his basket. Their cries echo down the village streets. The firelight flickers across their terrified faces. Parents weep silently, knowing the legend warns. Some children return, some do not. Where Krampus takes them, whether to mountain caves, frozen rivers, or the hidden places of the dark forest, changes from village to village. But one truth binds every version of the tale. No child emerges from the basket unchanged. Some return at dawn, shaking, pale, silent, but different, obedient, respectful, never cruel again. Others are gone, remembered only in whispers and prayers. And so, Krampus's punishments serve a single, chilling purpose: to carve fear into memory so deeply that goodness becomes a survival instinct. Because in the old Alpine world, winter punished the careless. Krampus merely followed its example. Fear does not disappear when Krampus leaves. It lingers like smoke in an abandoned room. After the creature's chains fade into the December dark, after the birch rods fall silent and the night exhales its final cold breath, something else remains behind. Something older, quieter, but no less terrifying. Villagers learned long ago that Krampus does not walk alone through the Alpine winter. His presence stirs other ancient things, forgotten spirits that move through the empty streets after he is gone. And the most feared of these was a legend whispered only by those who truly believed in the old ways. The story of the bells that never stop ringing. The elders claimed that Krampus's passing awakened the valley itself. The air grew heavier, the snow fell slower, and every sound stretched longer than it should, as if the world were holding its breath. But the silence never lasted, because in the far end of the mountains, where the cliffs rose like jagged teeth, lay a village known as Hollow's Echo. It was a place believed to be cursed long before Krampus ever stalked its borders. What made it infamous wasn't wolves or ghosts or storms, but a single ancient bell that had hung in the center of the village since time unremembered. It did not chime for celebrations or warnings. It rang on its own, governed by a force no human could see. For generations, the people of Hollow's Echo believed the bell kept them safe from the things that roamed the winter nights. When Krampus traveled the region, the bell would ring louder, trembling like a heartbeat shaken by terror. The villagers assumed this meant safety, that the bell drove him away. But as episode 7 taught us, there are greater horrors than punishment, greater terrors than the rattling chains of the Christmas demon. And the people of Hollow's Echo would soon learn the bell was not protecting them. It was warning them. One bitter December night, the sound of chains echoed across the cliffs. Families huddled inside their wooden homes, praying the bell would begin its nightly ringing. But it did not. The air hung still, and the silence felt alive. When Krampus had finished his judgment on a disobedient child, the creature's presence passed the borders of Hollow's Echo, and the bell began to tremble, not with ringing, but with something struggling from within. Witnesses later claimed they saw the iron sway, though there was no wind, as though something trapped inside the metal itself was fighting to be released. Then the ringing began. Not the sharp, bright sound of a bell, but a deep, hollow groan that seemed to rise from beneath the earth. The villagers froze. Even Krampus paused at the edge of the forest, tilting his horned head back toward the mountains, listening. The groaning tone stretched into a long, dreadful wail that rolled across the rooftops like a warning too late to heed. Those who had been punished earlier that night, children who still felt the sting of birch rods on their legs, ran home trembling, their fear rising into a quiet chorus of sobs. But the bell did not stop. It continued ringing, louder and louder, until windows shook and snow fell from rooftops. The bell ringer, an old man whose family had tended the tower for centuries, climbed the steps inside the wooden structure to calm the terrifying sound. But the moment he reached the top, the ringing ceased altogether. What replaced it was whispering, soft, layered, inhuman. The villagers couldn't make out the words, but the old man could. His lantern dropped from his hand and shattered below. Those who ran to help found the tower empty, the ropes swinging gently in the still air. The old man was gone. From that night on, the bell rang without pause. Day and night, sun or storm. It rang even on the cold mornings when children emerged with bruises still aching from Krampus's visit. It rang through meals, through prayers, through restless sleep. And beneath the ringing, villagers began hearing names, always whispered, always spoken in a voice that sounded like cold metal grinding against bone. The names belonged to those Krampus had punished the harshest. Children taken in his basket. Children molded by fear. Children who had vanished into the winter dark. And one by one, those whose names the bell called began disappearing again, even if they had returned home long ago. Their shoes remained by their beds. Their blankets were thrown aside. Their footprints led only toward the tower. Parents begged the bell to stop. Some smashed lanterns against it. Others prayed or wept or held their children close. But the bell only rang louder, as if awakened fully for the first time in centuries. And always, just behind the metal's echo, the villagers heard a second sound. A deep, distant clanking, like the chains of a creature returning. Krampus had warned them without speaking a word. His punishments were harsh, but they were simple. The bell's purpose was far more sinister. It did not correct the wicked. It consumed what was left behind. And so, whenever Krampus's shadow fades from the snow-covered mountains, the people still tell this tale. Beware the silence he leaves behind. It may not be peace. It may be the moment the bell takes its first breath. The bell of Hollow's echo did not stop ringing after the last child vanished. If anything, its voice grew stranger, less like metal struck by force and more like something alive, exhaling through iron lungs. Parents boarded doors. Windows were covered with blankets. Fires were kept burning day and night, though the flames shuddered each time the bell's voice rolled down the mountain. And all the while, the villagers felt watched. Not by Krampus, he had long departed, his chains fading with the night, but by something older, something awakened by centuries of silence, finally broken. Whispers spread quickly, though no one dared speak them aloud at first. Some claimed the bell was never meant to protect the village. It was meant to imprison something beneath it. Others believed the ringing signaled the return of the children taken in past winters. Children carried off in Krampus's basket. Children who had vanished into storms, caves, and forests, never to return. But the most terrifying rumor came from a half-mad shepherd who stumbled into the village square at dawn. His eyes were wide with frostbite and fear. He insisted he saw figures wandering near the tower, small, pale shapes drifting like shadows against the snow. They looked like children, but their movements were wrong, too slow, too still, as if they were listening for something or waiting. Night after night, the villagers heard footsteps circling their homes, bare feet dragging through snow, soft tapping on shutters, whispers crawling beneath the ringing of the bell. And then the voices came, not human, not entirely. They echoed through chimneys, slipped beneath locked doors, slid through the cracks in window frames. Some called out names. Others whispered lullabies in broken, shivering tones. Mothers held their children tight, terrified the voices would recognize them. One night, just before the moon dipped behind the peaks, The bell suddenly changed its tone. It dipped lower, too low for metal to reach naturally. The sound trembled through the earth itself. Snow slid from rooftops. Icicles shattered. Birds rose from trees as if fleeing. And beneath that deep, impossible chime, the villagers heard something else, a distant scratching, as though nails scraped from inside the mountain. For generations, Hollow's echo believed the tower stood on ordinary stone. But somewhere beneath the frozen rock, something was moving upward. Something that had been buried, or bound, or restrained long before the first house was ever built. The people realized then that the bell wasn't warning them. It was crying out in pain or fear. And whatever answered that cry was no longer sleeping. The village elder, a woman older than anyone remembered, confessed a truth she had kept hidden for decades. Long ago, when Krampus first began punishing the wicked, Hollow's echo struck a pact to keep something much worse at bay. Children taken by Krampus, she whispered, were spared from a greater fate, being claimed by the thing beneath the mountain. The bell tower was built to silence it, to drown out its voice with ringing. But with every child punished, every scream, every foot dragged into the snow, the creature beneath grew stronger, fed by the fear and guilt that Krampus stirred. And episode 7 had brought more fear than any winter before it. The creature, whatever it was, had grown too powerful to contain. The ringing was no longer suppression. It had become a plea for help. And tonight, as icy winds cut through the valley and the bell swung wildly without human touch, a crack tore through the stone beneath the tower. The groaning sound of splitting rock echoed across the mountains like the roar of something ancient awakening. Those who heard it knew the truth at once. Krampus punishes the wicked. But this thing hungers for something else entirely. The lost, the forgotten, the frightened, the ones the world has already given up on. As the tower shook and the bell screamed its iron heartbeat, Hollow's echo held its breath. Because for the first time in centuries, the creature in the mountain was rising. The night the mountain finally split open, Hollow's echo fell into a silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The bell tower shuddered violently, the iron bell swinging without sound at first, as though its voice had been stolen. Snow drifted from the rooftops. The fires in every home guttered low, and every villager, every trembling soul who had endured the endless ringing, could feel something moving beneath them. Not footsteps, not claws, something larger, something ancient. The earth groaned, and a wound opened along the slope of the cliffs, a fissure wide enough for darkness itself to crawl through. From within it, the air spilled out in a heavy, freezing tide, thick with the scent of iron and forgotten winters. And then they saw it. The thing the bell had been fighting for centuries. It did not emerge fully, not at first. What seeped out resembled smoke, or shadows pressed together, rippling like ink beneath ice. It swirled into the night sky, drifting along the village rooftops, filling the square, sliding beneath doors and through the smallest cracks. Wherever it touched the snow, the white turned black. Villagers fled, some prayed, some screamed. Others stood frozen, unable to move, mesmerized by the sight of something that should not exist. The creature had no shape, yet every frightened eye saw something different within its shadows. A lost child, a familiar face, a fear long buried. It reflected guilt like a mirror carved from nightmares. And then, for the first time in countless years, the bell found its voice again. It rang once, one deafening, violent strike that shook the valley. Twice, louder, stronger, as if pulled by invisible hands. A third time, so powerful that the windows burst outward, sending shards across the snow. The shadows recoiled as though burned. Every ring drove them back toward the fissure, tearing pieces of darkness apart, scattering them like dying embers. The villagers collapsed to their knees, covering their ears as the tower screamed with the fury of centuries. But the bell was not ringing alone. From the edge of the forest came the metallic clank of chains, slow at first, then growing faster. The sound approached the village like a storm made of iron and fury. And then he appeared, Krampus, towering against the moonlight, his horns carving a silhouette that sent terror and relief rushing through every beating heart. He marched straight toward the fissure, chains dragging behind him like thunder. The shadows recoiled from him violently. The creature beneath the mountain recognized him, perhaps feared him, perhaps hated him. Krampus slammed his staff into the ground with enough force to shake loose snow from every rooftop. The shadows screamed, writhing in the cold air, swirling desperately to maintain form. The bell rang again, and again, and again. Every toll weakened the creature. Every strike of Krampus's chains drove it back. The villagers watched in trembling awe as the mountain fissure began to close, stone grinding against stone like ancient teeth. The shadows writhed in desperation, clinging to anything they could. Doors, windows, frightened souls huddled in the streets. But the bell allowed no escape. With a final, thunderous roar, Krampus hurled his chains into the darkness. The iron glowed red-hot, burning through the last fragments of shadow. The fissure sealed shut with a crack that echoed through the valley like the final note of a funeral hymn. And just like that, silence returned. Not the eerie silence from before. A peaceful, tired silence, the kind that follows a storm that nearly broke the world. The bell slowed. Its final chime drifted across the snow like a sigh. Krampus turned toward the village, his burning eyes scanning the families gathered in the square. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His work, harsh, terrifying, necessary, was done. And then he vanished into the forest, chains trailing behind him until the sound faded into the embrace of winter. In the days that followed, Hollow's echo rebuilt what it could. The tower stood scorched but unbroken. The villagers felt lighter, as though a weight they had carried for generations had finally been lifted. And when Christmas returned the next year, the bell rang only once, a gentle, peaceful note, as if offering gratitude to those who had survived the night the mountain awakened. Some say the shadows still whisper beneath the earth. Some say Krampus still walks the borders every winter, ensuring they never rise again. But the people of Hollow's Echo know one truth. Fear can destroy, but it can also protect. And sometimes the monsters we dread most are the ones that save us from darker things we cannot name. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If you want more dark folklore, mythic tales, and haunting legends like this, make sure to subscribe and tell me which part of the world you're listening from, because every region has a monster waiting to be told.